Okay, you just read part 10 and you found out a little bit about Dan Cody and a little bit about Gatsby's parents, his actual parents, the real truth. Now we're going to start on part 11, and it's called Daisy's First Party. So we know that things went well when he had tea with Daisy, but we're going to find out what's been happening since then. And because I'm saying it's her first party, we know that she hasn't gone to any of his parties since they've been together. And remember, he was throwing those parties just in the hopes that she would, stop in, but she didn't. Before I start, I need to remind you of the East Egg and West Egg differences. East Egg is old money. They've always had money. They've always had this upper class, rich person mentality. So they don't really, mostly those people, when they look at West Egg people, they have the same amount of money, but they see them as a little bit more lower class, kind of like because they had to get it probably illegally. Anyway, it's just a real snooty thing. The East Eggers kind of look down their nose on the West Eggers. They all go to the parties and they all drink together and all that kind of stuff. But there's a little with the East Eggers, they're kind of like if a West Egger's being a little too drunk or a little too loud, they're going to kind of say something under their breath about him, not cool. Okay. So we're on page 101 in my book. It was a halt to in my association with his affairs. Where this is Nick talking, and he's talking about Gatsby's affairs. For several weeks, I didn't see him or hear his voice on the phone. Mostly, I was in New York, trotting around with Jordan and trying to ingratiate myself with her senile aunt. But finally, I went over to his house one Sunday afternoon. I hadn't been there 2 minutes when somebody brought Tom Buchanan in for a drink. I was startled, naturally, but the really surprising thing was that it hadn't happened before. They were a party of 3 on horseback, Tom and a man named Sloan, and a pretty woman in a large riding habit who had been there previously. I'm delighted to see you, said Gatsby, standing on his porch. I'm delighted you dropped in. As though they cared. Sit right down, have a cigarette or a cigar. He walked around the room quickly, ringing bells. I'll have something for you to drink in just a minute. He was profoundly affected by the fact that Tom was there. Okay, so you have to understand, he's having an affair. He's hanging around with this man's wife. This man doesn't know that. He happens to be with other people who stop at Gatsby's house. So Tom's just kind of there. Well, Gatsby is startled by this because, okay, hold on, we'll find out there's no connection in the Daisy thing, but it is, he doesn't know that yet. Sorry, let me turn my phone off. I should have done this before. I apologize. Okay, so they stopped by, Sloan, this woman, and Tom Buchanan. He was profoundly affected by the fact that Tom was there, but he would be uneasy anyhow until he had given them something, realizing in a vague way that that was all they really came for. Mr. Sloan wanted nothing. A lemonade? No, thanks. A little champagne? Nothing at all, thanks. I'm sorry. Did you have a nice ride? Very good roads around here. I suppose the automobiles, yeah. Moved by an irresistible impulse, Gatsby turned to Tom, who had accepted the invitation as a stranger. Meaning they introduced him, and Tom was like, oh, nice to meet you. Remember, they've already met before. But I guess Gatsby wasn't important enough for Tom to remember that. So he says, I believe we've met somewhere before, Mr. Buchanan. Oh, yes, said Tom, gruffly polite, but obviously not remembering. So we did. I remember very well. About 2 weeks ago. That's right. You were with Nick here. I know your wife, continued Gatsby almost aggressively. That so? Tom turned to me. You live near here, Nick? Next door. That's so. Mr. Sloan didn't enter into the conversation, but lounged back haughtily in his chair. The woman said nothing either until unexpectedly, after 2 highballs, she became cordial. So she had a few drinks and then she decided to talk. Well, I'll come over for your next party, Mr. Gatsby, she suggested. What do you say? Certainly. I'd be delighted to have you. It'd be very nice, said Mr. Sloane without gratitude. Well, I think we ought to be starting home. Please don't hurry, Gatsby urged them. He had control of himself now, and he wanted to see more of Tom. Okay, so stop right here for a second. At first he was kind of startled, like, oh, Tom's here. This is his wife is the one that I'm, having this affair with. I'm kind of nervous. But then once he's calmed down a little bit, it's that morbid curiosity. He wants to know more about Tom to see what Daisy sees in him. He's curious. Okay, so when it says he had control of himself now, and he wanted to see more of Tom. He wants to know what Daisy sees in him. Like, what is this that that Daisy married when she didn't marry Gatsby? Why don't you stay for supper? I wouldn't be surprised if some other people dropped in from New York. You come to supper with me, said the lady enthusiastically, both of you. This included me. Mr. Sloane got to his feet. Come along, he said, but to her only. I mean it, she insisted. I'd love to have you, lots of room. Gatsby looked at me questioningly. He wanted to go, and he didn't see that Mr. Sloane had determined he shouldn't. Now, this is a little bit of like body language and just something that Gatsby wasn't necessarily picking up on. Clearly, this Mr. Sloane didn't want these two to go. That he wasn't part of the invitation. He didn't want that. And he kind of says to only her, like, let's go. But Gatsby doesn't really understand that. Remember, Gatsby is not raised in this upper class, like, social circles and stuff like that. So he's kind of looking at Nick like, maybe we should go. I'm afraid I won't be able to, I said. Well, you come, she urged, concentrating on Gatsby. Mr. Sloane murmured something close to her ear. We won't be late if we start now, she insisted aloud. I haven't got a horse, said Gatsby. I used to ride in the army, but I've never bought a horse. I'll have to follow you in my car. Excuse me for a minute. So clearly she's a little bit tipsy, right? And so she's just thinking this would be a great idea, for Gatsby to come. Mr. Sloane doesn't want him to, and is trying to make that obvious without being like super rude. So he whispers in her ear something probably like, we don't have time, like it's not going to work. And so she says, well, if we leave now, we will. So Gatsby, they're on horseback. He says, I don't have a horse, but I'll get my car and I'll ride after you. So he leaves to go get his stuff. The rest of us walked out on the porch where Sloane and the lady began an impassioned conversation aside. So they're probably arguing about it. My God, I believe the man's coming, said Tom. Doesn't he know she doesn't want him? Okay, so put a mark right here. There's something about his social classes again. Tom realizes, they're just being polite. And she might think she wants to, but she's drinking, so she's like tipsy. But it's a polite invite. If you were of this upper class and if you were of this like social station, you would know that and you would say, oh, no, thank you. I appreciate it so much, but I can't. But Gatsby is really taking it to heart, is taking the invitation seriously. And Tom is like disgusted by that. Like, doesn't he know anything? Like these West Eggers. She says she does want him. This is Nick. She has a big dinner party and he won't know a soul there. He frowned. I wonder where in the devil he met Daisy. My God, I may be old fashioned in my ideas, but women run around too much these days to suit me. They meet all kinds of crazy fish. Okay, so huge double standard alert right here. Myrtle runs around and he likes that. But when his wife does it, like places without him, he doesn't like that. So it's okay for, him to do it, but not his wife. And it's okay for Tom's girlfriend to do it, but not his wife. Suddenly, Mr. Sloane and the lady walked down the steps and mounted their horses. Come on, said Mr. Sloane to Tom. We're late. We've got to go. And then he said to me, tell him we couldn't wait, will you? Tom and I shook hands, and the rest of us exchanged a cool nod, and they trotted quickly down the drive, disappearing under the August foliage, just as Gatsby, with hat and light overcoat in hand, came out the front door. So Tom kind of had to, so Nick kind of had to be the one to be like, you know, Tom was evidently perturbed at Daisy's running around alone, for on the following Saturday night, he came with her to Gatsby's party. Okay, so perturbed means annoyed. So he's like, she's been going to these places. She's been meeting people that I don't know. And remember, in the 20s, this was very uncommon. Women, especially married women, didn't go places without, their husband, and didn't know people their husband didn't know. So he says, let's both go to this party. Perhaps its presence gave the evening its peculiar quality of oppressiveness. Underline that line. Perhaps his presence gave the evening its peculiar quality of oppressiveness. It stands out in my memory from Gatsby's other parties that summer. There were the same people, or at least the same sort of people, the same profusion of champagne, the same many-colored, many-keyed commotion, but I felt an unpleasantness in the air, a pervading harshness that hadn't been there before. So underline that. I felt an unpleasantness in the air, a pervading harshness that hadn't been there before. Those two lines show how this party is different, okay, than the ones that Nick has seen previously, or has been to previously. And it has a lot to do with Tom being there, but we're going to learn also has a lot to do with Daisy being there. Or perhaps I had merely grown used to it, grown to accept West Egg as a complete world in itself, with its own standards and its own great figures, second to nothing because it had no consciousness of being so. And now I was looking at it again through Daisy's eyes. Okay, so he's seeing it differently. He's seeing it almost like for the first time because Daisy's there. Remember, Daisy's very unlike the West Eggers. It is invariably saddening to look through new eyes at things upon which you have expanded your own powers of adjustment. They arrived at twilight, and as we strolled out among the sparkling hundreds, Daisy's voice was playing murmurous tricks in her throat. "These things excite me so," she whispered. "If you want to kiss me at any time during the evening, Nick, just let me know, and I'll be glad to arrange it for you. Just mention my name, or present a green card. I'm giving out green. Look around," suggested Gatsby. "I'm looking around. I'm having a marvelous, you must see the faces of many people you've heard about." So Gatsby's like, look at all the people. Look how, popular I am. I must be important if these people are coming to my home. So he wants them to see. He wants Daisy to see, but he also wants to make sure that Tom sees. Tom's arrogant eyes roam the crowd. Okay, he's not impressed. I underlined that, and then I wrote, Tom is not impressed. He feels like these people are beneath him. He's too classy to be here. Okay. "We don't go around very much," he said. "In fact, I was just thinking, I don't know a soul here." "Perhaps you know that lady." Gatsby indicated a gorgeous, scarcely human orchid of a woman who sat in state under a white plum tree. Tom and Daisy stared with that peculiarly unreal feeling that accompanies the recognition of a hitherto ghostly celebrity of the movies. "She's lovely," said Daisy. "The man bending over her is her director." He took them ceremoniously from group to group. "Mrs. Buchanan and Mr. Buchanan." After an instant hesitation, he added, "the polo player." Okay, so he's introducing them to people. And when he says Mr. Buchanan, there's really nothing except for the fact that he's rich that you know about him. But remember, he plays polo. That's one of the things that's how he spends his time. So Gatsby kind of says that as an afterthought. It's kind of a dig because how else can he describe him? The rich guy, Tom Buchanan. So he says it kind of as a dig. And I love this. "Oh, no," objected Tom, "not me." But evidently the sound of it pleased Gatsby, for Tom remained the polo player for the rest of the evening. So Gatsby's doing it a little bit out of spite, okay? Because Tom doesn't like it, so Gatsby's going to keep doing it. "I've never met so many celebrities," Daisy exclaimed. "I like that man. What was his name? With the sort of blue nose?" Gatsby identified him, adding that he was a small producer. "Well, I liked him anyhow. I'd a little rather not. No. We'll say this better. I'd a little rather not be the polo player, said Tom pleasantly. I'd rather look at all these famous people in oblivion. So Tom is kind of saying he doesn't really want these people to know who he is. He wants to kind of just like, watch them from afar, but because they're of a lower class than him, he doesn't necessarily want to like let them know who he is. Okay, because they're probably going to know who the Buchanans are. They have that much money. Daisy and Gatsby danced. I put a block around this. Remember in all the other parties, he never ever danced. He never, singled out one woman, or he's never like with, one person. He always kind of watched from afar. So this is the first time that Nick sees Gatsby dancing at one of his parties. I remember being impressed by his graceful, conservative foxtrot. I had never seen him dance before. Then they sauntered over to my house and sat on the steps for half an hour, while at her request, I remained watchfully in the garden. In case there's a fire or a flood, she exclaimed, or any act of God. Okay, so remember what Jordan said about there isn't any privacy at small parties. These huge parties, there's more intimate. So he has the opportunity. He can slip away with Daisy for a little bit, spend some time together, probably playing Yahtzee or something, or maybe just like a quicker version of that. And Tom or Nick is kind of like watching to make sure Tom doesn't, show up or look for him. Tom appeared from his oblivion as we were sitting down to supper together. Do you mind if I eat with some people over there? He said. A fellow's getting off some pretty funny stuff. Go ahead, answered Daisy genially. And if you want to take down any addresses, here's my little gold pencil. She looked around after a moment and told me the girl was common but pretty. And I knew that except for the half hour she had been alone with Gatsby, she was having a good time. Okay, so before we go on, the fact that she offers like her pen or her pencil or whatever to get anything, Daisy sees him flirting. Daisy sees, hold on, Whitman, wake up, baby. Wake up. He is having a bad dream. Okay. So Daisy sees her husband, sees that he's flirting, especially with this one girl. And so to make him aware that she sees it, that's when she offers her little gold pencil if he wants to take down an address or something. But then she tries to act like she doesn't care because she sees the girl that he's flirting with and talking to. And she says to Nick that she's common but pretty, and then kind of pretends. But Nick realizes this is not her scene. Okay, she likes being with Gatsby, but all these people and stuff is just not, what she enjoys. We were at a particularly tipsy table. That was my fault. Gatsby had been called to the phone, and I'd enjoyed these same people only 2 weeks before. But what had amused me then turned septic in the air now. How do you feel, Miss Baedeker? The girl addressed was trying unsuccessfully to slump against my shoulder. At this inquiry, she sat up and opened her eyes. What? A massive and lethargic woman who had been urging Daisy to play golf with her at the local club tomorrow spoke in Miss Baedeker's defense. Oh, she's all right now. When she's had 5 or 6 cocktails, she always starts screaming like that. I tell her she ought to leave it alone. I do leave it alone, affirmed the accused hollowly. We heard you yelling. So I said to Doc Civet here, there's somebody that needs your help, Doc. She's much obliged, I'm sure, said another friend without gratitude, but you got her dress all wet when you stuck her head in the pool. Anything I hate is to get my head stuck in a pool, mumbled Miss Baedeker. They almost drowned me once over in New Jersey. Then you ought to leave it alone, countered Doc Civet. Speak for yourself, cried Miss Baedeker violently. Your hand shakes. I wouldn't let you operate on me. It was like that. Almost this table, the way they're acting, like somebody had gotten so drunk that they had to put her head in the pool. I mean, it's just really not like classy acting people. And Daisy's kind of like looking around like, who are these people? Like in her circle of friends, that wouldn't have happened. And so Nick kind of sees that. Okay. Almost the last thing I remember was standing with Daisy and watching the moving picture director and his star. They were still under the white plum tree, and their faces were touching, except for a pale, thin ray of moonlight between. It occurred to me that he had been very slowly bending toward her all evening to attain this proximity. And even while I watched, I saw him stoop one ultimate degree and kiss at her cheek. I like her, said Daisy. I think she's lovely. But the rest offended her, and inarguably because it wasn't a gesture, but an emotion. She was appalled by West Egg, this unprecedented place that Broadway had begotten upon a Long Island fishing village, appalled by its raw vigor that chafed under the old euphemisms, and by the too obtrusive fate that herded its inhabitants along a shortcut from nothing to nothing. She saw something awful in the very simplicity she failed to understand. So I marked that whole paragraph about how Daisy, because she's old money, she does not see this group, these kind of people, this party as classy. And she's definitely looking down. She's not doing it like outwardly. It's almost like she can't help it. Tom's doing it outwardly. But Daisy, wants to like it because that's Gatsby, and she wants to, but it's almost like her breeding, her being raised, how she was raised with old money. It's like she can't help it. I sat on the front steps with them while they waited for their car. It was dark here in front. Only the bright doors sent 10 square feet of light volleying in and out into the soft black morning. Sometimes a shadow moved against the dressing room blind above, gave way to another shadow, an indefinite procession of shadows that rouged and powdered in invisible glass. Who is this Gatsby, anyhow? Demanded Tom suddenly. Some big bootlegger? Where'd you hear that? I inquired. I didn't hear it. I imagined it. A lot of these newly rich people are just big bootleggers, Not Gatsby, I said shortly. He was silent for a moment. The pebbles of the drive crunched under his feet. Well, he certainly must have strained himself to get this menagerie together. So he's putting down the whole party. He's acting like it was just some, podunk barn dance. And he's not impressed. He says, it's beneath him. So he's outwardly saying this. A breeze stirred the gray haze of Daisy's fur collar. At least they're more interesting than the people we know, she said with an effort. She's taken up for Gatsby. He doesn't realize it, but she is. Well, you didn't look so interested. Well, I was. Tom laughed and turned to me. Did you notice Daisy's face when that girl asked her to put her under a cold shower? So you have to remember, Tom knows Daisy pretty well. They come from the same, type of situation. He knows that she was disgusted. Even if she's pretending she wasn't, he knows. And he's like calling her on it. He was like, no, you were just as disgusted as I was. You look down on them just as much as I am. Daisy began to sing with the music in a husky rhythmic whisper, bringing out a meaning in each word that it had never had before and would never have again. When the melody rose, her voice broke up sweetly, following it in a way contralto voices have, and each change tipped out a little of her warmth human magic upon the air. Lots of people come who haven't been invited, she said suddenly. That girl hadn't been invited. They simply forced their way in, and he's too polite to object. So again, she's taking up for Gatsby. She's taking up for the party. Well, that girl, yeah, she was a little bit lower class, but he didn't invite her. He's just so polite. Well, Tom just doesn't like Gatsby because he's from West Egg. Doesn't like it that Daisy knew him without Tom knowing him. And now he's probably not going to like the fact that Daisy is taking up for him. I'd like to know who he is and what he does, insisted Tom. And I think I'll make a point of finding out. Put a big star by that. That's going to come into play. I can tell you right now, she answered. He owns some drugstores, a lot of drugstores. He built them up himself. The dilatory limousine came rolling up the drive. Good night, Nick, said Daisy. Her glance left me and sought the lighted top of the steps, where 3 o'clock in the morning, a neat, sad little waltz of that year was drifting out on the open door. After all, In the very casualness of Gatsby's party, there were romantic possibilities totally absent from her world. What was it up there in that song that seemed to be calling her back inside? Perhaps some unbelievable guest would arrive, a person infinitely rare and to be marveled at, some authentically radiant young girl who, with one fresh glance at Gatsby, one moment of magical encounter, would blot out those 5 years of unwavering devotion. Okay, and that's the end of part 11. But that last part, as Daisy's leaving, you've heard the cliche, having your cake and eating it too. You can't do both. So she's having an affair with Gatsby, but she's still with Tom. She hasn't told Tom, and we don't know her, what she's going to do. But as she's leaving, Nick sees, she looks up and Gatsby's still there. And there are all these women. And what if this is the night that some woman, walks into his life and is wonderful and awesome and totally makes him forget the last 5 years that he was totally and completely devoted to her. So there's always that. Now she's leaving, going home with her husband. Okay. Probably going to be, at some point intimate with her husband. But she's definitely with her husband. But yet she's jealous that Gatsby, the possibility that Gatsby could possibly meet someone else. So this is kind of an inner turmoil that she's having with herself. Okay. So that's the end of part 11. I'll see you next time.